A liquid-cooled motorcycle is 10 times more efficient, more powerful, and objectively superior. Yet 50% of the riders on Earth still ride in air-cooled motorcycles. It forces me to ask, are half of the people watching this video stupid? Or do they know something the other half doesn't? What we found out shocked us. The truth is, millions refuse to trade nostalgia for a radiator. In this video, we reveal why air-cooled is still the only affordable choice for half the planet, and why the brutal war for the American biker's soul is far from over. But unfortunately, they are a dying breed. From shifting economies to the crushing weight of new regulations, you're about to find out why we're in the final days of the iconic air-cooled era. At its core, every internal combustion engine is not just a machine that creates motion, it is a machine that generates heat, massive amounts of it. Only a small portion of fuel energy becomes usable power. The rest turns into thermal load that must be controlled. If that heat isn't managed, performance fades, metal expands unevenly, clearances fall apart, and eventually the engine fails. Cooling isn't a feature, it's the problem everything else revolves around. And this is where physics draws a line that doesn't negotiate. Air by nature is a weak cooling medium. It's light, it carries little heat, and it struggles to pull energy away quickly. Even with fins and airflow, its effectiveness depends on conditions outside the engine. Speed helps. Open roads help. But sit in traffic or push the engine hard, and heat builds faster than air can remove it. Control starts to slip. Liquid cooling plays a completely different game. If this kind of breakdown, where we strip machines down to the physics instead of just repeating specs, is exactly why you watch videos like this, hit that like button, drop a little hype, and subscribe. That's what keeps us committed to bringing you engineering. Explain the way it actually works, not the way it's marketed. A water-based coolant doesn't rely on chance airflow. It moves through the engine, deliberately routed around the hottest areas, absorbing heat directly where it forms. Then it carries that energy to a radiator, where it's released in a controlled, repeatable way. Not sometimes, not depending on conditions, every time. That consistency changes everything. When temperatures stay stable, engineers can tighten internal tolerances. Combustion becomes more efficient. Power increases. Emissions drop. Components last longer because they aren't constantly expanding and contracting under uneven heat. The engine stops reacting to stress and starts operating with precision. This is why modern performance motorcycles, and even everyday commuter bikes, lean heavily toward liquid cooling. Not because it's trendy, but because it solves the heat problem at a deeper level than air ever can. From a purely engineering standpoint, the conclusion is straightforward. Liquid cooling isn't just better, it's more complete. But engineering truth doesn't always survive contact with reality. Inside a controlled lab, the physics are brutally clear. Liquid cooling wins without question. However, once you step into the global market, another force begins to dominate decisions far more aggressively than heat ever could: cost. In much of the world, motorcycles are not weekend machines. They are transportation in its most essential form. Across regions like India, Southeast Asia, and Africa, the real question isn't about peak thermal efficiency, it's about survival. What can you afford? What can you fix? In these markets, the definition of better shifts away from performance benchmarks and toward the price of a spare part. And this is where air cooling refuses to disappear. In these markets, motorcycles are built to meet a completely different reality. We're not talking about premium machines packed with electronics and refinement. We're talking about bikes that cost less than $1,000 brand new. Machines expected to carry families, haul cargo, and generate daily income. At that level, complexity becomes a liability. Liquid cooling adds parts, radiators, pumps, hoses, seals, coolant. Each one increases cost. Each one introduces another point of failure. And in places where access to parts, tools, or trained mechanics is limited, those risks compound quickly. Air-cooled engines take the opposite approach. No fluid systems, no external plumbing, no dependence on anything beyond airflow and basic mechanical function. It's a design rooted in simplicity, and that simplicity translates directly into durability. But durability isn't just a spec, it's a survival instinct. Now I'm curious because this part separates theory from reality. If you've ever ridden or owned an air-cooled bike in tough conditions, heat, traffic, long distance, or rough roads, What was your experience actually like? Drop it in the comments because real-world riding stories say more about these machines than any spec sheet ever will. These engines can handle inconsistent maintenance. They can survive dust, heat, rough roads, and constant use without needing precise care. They don't demand perfect conditions, they adapt to imperfect ones. And in this context, that matters more than efficiency ever could. Because when a motorcycle is your source of income, failure isn't an inconvenience. It's a disruption to your livelihood. Lost time, lost earnings. Sometimes no backup plan. So the definition of better changes. Air cooling isn't chosen because it leads on paper. It's chosen because it works, reliably, affordably, and without complication. It lowers the barrier to entry and keeps millions of riders moving in environments where mobility is directly tied to survival. That's the reality most spec sheets never show. But necessity only explains part of the story, because in another world entirely, riders are making the same choice for a completely different reason, not because they have to, but because they refuse to let something go. And that's where this stops being about economics and starts becoming something far more personal. In a land of abundance, a choice isn't just a utility, it's a statement. Step away from necessity and into the United States, and the same decision, air over liquid, starts to mean something entirely different. Here, it isn't about getting to work or keeping a business alive. It's about identity. Few machines carry that weight more clearly than a Harley-Davidson. For more than a century, it hasn't just produced motorcycles, it has shaped a culture, and at the center of that culture sits the air-cooled V-twin. For many riders, that engine isn't just hardware. It's a symbol. It represents continuity, machines that feel connected to something older than the rider himself. It represents freedom, not filtered, not refined, but raw and immediate. And above all, it represents authenticity, the sense that what you're riding is mechanical, visible, and honest. You don't need to start the engine to feel it. You see it in the cooling fins carved into exposed metal, in the size and shape of the cylinders, in a silhouette that's recognizable from a distance without a single badge. These elements aren't cosmetic, they're identity made visible. Change them, and something deeper shifts. Hide the engine behind radiators and hoses, and the machine begins to lose the visual language riders have come to associate with it. Not better or worse, just different in a way that doesn't sit right, and that's where resistance takes hold. When Harley-Davidson began introducing partially liquid-cooled systems, the response wasn't driven by charts or data. It was emotional. Riders weren't debating efficiency, they were reacting to a feeling that something fundamental was being altered. Because liquid cooling, in this context, doesn't just signal improvement, it signals departure. A move away from what the machine has always represented. And that creates a conflict no spec sheet can resolve. On one side, engineering continues to push forward toward tighter emission standards, higher performance, greater control. On the other, a community holds on to a definition of motorcycling that values character over optimization. And when those forces meet, logic doesn't automatically take control, because these machines aren't just transportation, they're statements, rituals, extensions of personal identity. And once a machine reaches that level, changing it doesn't feel like progress. It feels like losing something that can't be measured. So riders push back, not because they're unaware of the benefits, but because they understand the cost. And when that kind of resistance meets engineering reality, the solution isn't elimination, it's adaptation. By now, the divide is impossible to ignore. Air cooling stands for simplicity, durability, and a kind of mechanical honesty riders recognize instantly. Liquid cooling represents control, efficiency, and the relentless push toward higher performance. Both make sense, and neither is willing to disappear. So what happens when progress moves forward, but identity refuses to follow? Engineering does what it always does under pressure. It looks for a middle ground. And in this case, that answer didn't come from motorcycles at all. It came from one of the most extreme environments ever engineered. Wartime aircraft, machines pushed to their absolute limits, where heat wasn't just a challenge, it was a threat to survival. The solution was simple in concept, but powerful in execution. Use oil not just to lubricate, but to carry heat away. That same thinking found its way into motorcycles as a compromise, oil cooling. And here's where it gets interesting. Because not everyone wants extremes, some riders want that balance. If you've ever ridden an oil-cooled machine, or even felt the difference between raw air cooling and something more controlled, Tell us what stood out to you. And if this kind of engineering compromise, the middle ground, most people overlook, is exactly what you find interesting, hit like and subscribe. That's what pushes us to keep breaking down the details. Most channels skip. At first glance, it still looks like a traditional air-cooled engine. Cooling fins, open airflow, familiar design. But beneath the surface, something important has changed. Oil is now moving through the hottest parts of the engine, pulling heat directly from areas air alone struggles to reach. Then it cycles outward, passing through a small cooler, shedding that heat before repeating the process. No bulky radiator, no complex plumbing, just a second layer of control. The result is noticeable. Temperatures stabilize, heat spikes soften. Engines can push a little harder, stay consistent a little longer without stepping fully into the complexity of liquid cooling systems. It feels like the best of both worlds, but it isn't. Because oil, for all its advantages, still can't absorb and transfer heat the way liquid coolant can. It improves the situation, but it doesn't redefine it, and that's the reality. Oil cooling was never meant to win this fight. It was meant to delay it, to give traditional engines more time without forcing them to become something they were never designed to be. It's not a replacement, it's a negotiation. And like all compromises, it works until the rules change. Because today, engines aren't judged only by how well they survive heat. They're judged by how cleanly they operate from the very first ignition. And under that kind of pressure, even smart solutions start to fall behind. Because up to this point, every tension in this story has come from within, engineering against simplicity, performance against identity. But now something else steps in. Something that doesn't compromise. Something that doesn't care what riders prefer. Emissions regulations, standards like the Euro 5 emission standard and the even stricter Euro 6 emission standard have completely redefined what clean actually means. It's no longer enough for an engine to settle into efficiency over time. It has to be clean immediately, from the very first ignition. And this is where air-cooled engines begin to fall behind. Not because they're poorly engineered, but because they operate under a different thermal reality. They take longer to warm up. Without a controlled coolant system, temperature rises gradually, depending on airflow and load. That means more time spent below optimal operating conditions, where combustion is less precise, fuel doesn't burn as completely, and emissions rise. Hydrocarbons increase, carbon monoxide builds. The engine is simply dirtier when it's cold. Liquid-cooled engines approach this differently. By circulating coolant, they bring the engine up to temperature faster, and more importantly, they hold it there. That stability allows fuel systems and catalytic converters to work at peak efficiency almost immediately. And those first moments matter more than ever. Because modern emissions testing doesn't happen in perfect conditions. It reflects real riding, cold starts, short trips, stop-and-go traffic. Everyday use, exactly where air cooling struggles most. So even if an air-cooled engine runs clean, once fully warmed, it fails where the standards are strictest. That creates a mismatch. Not a flaw in design, but a conflict with the rules themselves. And regulations don't bend to preserve tradition. Manufacturers have to adapt or fall out of compliance, which leaves them with very little room to maneuver. To meet current and future standards, they're being pushed quietly but decisively toward liquid cooling and tighter thermal control. Not out of preference, but necessity. This is what's really ending the air-cooled era. Because what began as a question of efficiency has now become something far more complex. Because in the end, this was never just about cooling systems or horsepower figures. It was about what riders value when everything else is stripped away: function, identity, or meaning. And when all of those forces collide, the answer isn't simple, which is exactly why the final step forward isn't about choosing a side, it's about understanding the full picture. Do you like this video? Click that like button. And if you want to support us even more, become a member and get early access to the newest deep dives. And this is where the story turns in a way most people don't expect. Because just as air-cooled engines begin to fade under pressure, from engineering, from regulation, they start gaining something else. Value, not practical value. Meaning. And if that feels familiar, it should. Look at vinyl records. By every measurable standard, vinyl is outdated. It's fragile, inconvenient, and objectively less precise than modern digital audio. And yet, it never disappeared. it transformed. People don't buy vinyl because it's better on paper. They buy it because it feels different. There's a ritual to it. The weight in your hands, the deliberate act of placing the needle, the slight imperfections in the sound that remind you something physical is happening. It's not about efficiency, it's about connection. And air-cooled engines are moving along that exact same path. Because once you strip away the numbers, horsepower, emissions, thermal control, what remains isn't performance, it's experience. The exposed cooling fins catching light, the uneven idle that pulses instead of hums, the subtle vibration that travels through the bars and into your hands. To some riders, those aren't flaws, they're signals. Proof that what you're riding hasn't been filtered, softened, or engineered into silence. Modern machines, for all their brilliance, often remove that layer. They smooth everything out. They isolate you from the process. And in doing so, they create a gap, a quiet demand for something less perfect, but more real. Nostalgia is part of it, but it doesn't tell the whole story. This isn't just about looking backward. It's about holding onto a kind of interaction that's slowly disappearing. A machine that doesn't hide what it's doing. A system you can feel working beneath you. And as that becomes rare, it becomes valuable. That's the shift. Air-cooled engines are no longer judged only as machines. They're becoming symbols, reminders of a time when riding wasn't just controlled, it was experienced. So riders don't choose them in spite of their limitations. They choose them because of what those limitations represent. A resistance to over-refinement, a preference for something tangible, a belief that not everything worth owning needs to be optimized. What started as a question about cooling systems has turned into something deeper, because this was never just about engineering. From a purely technical standpoint, the outcome is clear. Liquid cooling dominates. It manages heat with precision, supports higher performance, improves efficiency, and satisfies modern emissions demands. In the language of physics, there's no real argument, but machines don't exist in a vacuum. Step into the real world, and the equation shifts. In many places, motorcycles aren't weekend toys, they're daily survival. And in that environment, air-cooled engines continue to make sense. Not because they outperform, but because they endure. They're simpler, more affordable, easier to maintain, and far more forgiving when conditions turn harsh. Then there's culture. For some riders, especially where motorcycling runs deeper than transportation, air cooling represents something more than function. It carries history, identity, a feeling that newer machines, for all their advancement, struggle to replicate. And above all of it, there's pressure that doesn't negotiate, regulation. Modern standards are steadily removing the space air-cooled engines once occupied, not because they suddenly failed, but because the rules changed around them. So everything collides. Physics pushes forward, economics holds ground, culture resists, regulation closes in. And right there, in that tension, is the real answer. Air-cooled engines aren't irrational, they're contextual. They exist because, for certain riders, in certain conditions, they still make sense. But that window is narrowing, not suddenly, but steadily. And as they fade from everyday roads, their meaning only deepens, because what they represent doesn't disappear as easily as the machines themselves. Which leaves one final question hanging. When everything else moves forward, what do we choose to leave behind? And if this video made you rethink what better really means, not just in engines, but in engineering as a whole, then you're exactly the kind of rider this channel is built for. Click the next video to continue this road trip. Join the tribe by subscribing, and if you want to support the channel and get early access to our newest deep dives, become a member. And don't forget, hit like on this video. That's what tells the algorithm this kind of thinking still matters.